out of the box. Welcome to Drive Time Exchange. As rubber hits the road, hard talk meets great music. Monday to Thursday, 4 to 6 p.m. on Net Radio, taking you above and beyond.
Today, when I look around in the world, what do I see? I see footprints that man have left on the sand while walking through times. I see fruits of our ambitions, figments of our imaginations, and I ask myself, when will it end? When will it end? It is plain to see, universally this land is not bountiful as it was, simply because in his quest for success, nothing stands in man's way. All rivers run dry, soon the birds will fly, the mountains will be no longer high. And when I really think of it, I just wonder why, oh why.
All right, everybody, good afternoon to you wherever you may be, Trinidad and Tobago, the wider world, those of you in the Caribbean, wherever you are right about now. We are happy to have you here, and if you're wondering where here is, well, this is New Era TT Radio, the heartbeat of the Caribbean. We take you above and beyond, and as this is where we jump inside our drive time exchange, where you get bold discussions taking place, and of course, marshalling us inside of the exchange on a Thursday and Friday. Not Thursday and Friday, Wednesday and Thursday, sorry, is none other than Andy Johnson. He's our host inside. Andy, good afternoon to you. How are you doing?
Hi, Charles. Good afternoon. Pretty good, man. Thank you very much. So, those who may be watching and listening to us, this edition of the program.
Well, it's good to have you. I trust that you had a good day.
Well, yeah, certainly. And it's a similar feelings from me to you. And it's not done yet.
No, it's not. It's not. All right. So we're inside today. So it's all yours. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you very much. Well, good afternoon to our listeners and our viewers here on New Radio TT. Well, let's tell you, we have a packed agenda. We're thankful for that. We're going to be talking with Mr. Clyde Weatherhead. He's a former trade union leader who's written a piece in the paper called After 63 Years, How You Feel. He's talking about independence, and that's what we're celebrating now. We also hope to be talking with Mr. Garvin Heerah. He's a security expert, and he's written a piece in the paper called Tension in the Atmosphere, and that has to do with U.S., we might want to say, maneuvers in this part of the world, military seagoing vessels and military people on board is an issue concerning what is considered to be democracy and independence in Venezuela. And in fact, that is what is the substance of our first discussion with David Abdullah, the head of an organization called the Movement for Social Justice. He's a political leader of that. Shameful and a sad day for Trinidad and Tobago. He's saying that because of positions and actions that the government of Trinidad and Tobago, led by Mrs. Kamala Prasad, has taken in the issue of their perspective on the fact of American military might, if that is not a contentious term to use, is in the region for their reasons, and that the positions that she as Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago has taken on it. Let me just read a couple of the opening lines of the statement put out by David on it in the last couple of days. It's dated August 24th, and it says, shameful and sad day for Trinidad and Tobago. The Movement for Social Justice states that today is a day both of shame and sadness for Trinidad and Tobago, 1 week away from our commemorating our 63rd anniversary of our independence, and just weeks away from marking the 49th year of our Republican status. We say this in light of the statement issued yesterday by the Prime Minister of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, in which she unequivocally expressed support for the U.S. government's deployment of American military assets into the Caribbean region. We will go further into it as is necessary, but let us just welcome David to the discussion. Good to see you, my friend.
Yes, good afternoon, Andy and Sir Charles and everyone who's tuned in. to the program. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and thanks for making the time to be with the audience here for that, because I think you're going dealing with this, and then you're going directly to another forum, is it, where similar discussions are to take place around this very issue, because it's almost all consuming these days, not so?
Yes, I'm going to a discussion at 5. In fact, I'm parked up in the car park, so we chat, and then I'm at the function at 5, and then later this evening with the Emancipation Support Committee's radio program in Daba at 8 o'clock. So it's back to back, and I was on Morning Edition, which you hosted many moons ago, this morning at 6:10.
Yes. All right. Well, that is good. So let's get into the issue here, dealing with what you say. Why describe the situation as you say? It's evocative of shame and sadness for Trinidad and Tobago.
Yes, well, Trinidad and Tobago has had a long history of taking positions in international relations on principle, whether or not those would have been contrary or in conflict with the foreign policy of powerful nations, most particularly the United States. So, for example, as you know, in 1972, Trinidad and Tobago, together with the other 3 Caribbean countries that had independence at the time, Jamaica, Barbados, and Guyana, established diplomatic relations with Cuba. And these 4 small Caribbean countries were the first after Mexico in this hemisphere to establish diplomatic relations with Cuba. That is, when you're talking about 1972, height of the Cold War and U.S. power untrammeled in this region. And then, we have consistently opposed and called for the end to the blockade against Cuba by the United States. And this is, again, contrary to U.S. policy. We have recognized the state of Palestine and called for an end to the war against the Palestinians. And that, again, is contrary to U.S. policy. And in the, you would recall, Andy, in the 80s and so on, 70s and 80s, Trinidad and Tobago, the CARICOM countries, took very strong positions against the apartheid regime in South Africa. And we stood with the liberation movements in Angola, Mozambique, and Namibia, and so on. And of course, Zimbabwe. And all of that was contrary to the US policy, and also that of the UK. And Stalin, of course, sang about all those things. Black Science sang about all those things in that great Calypso bundle. Yes, so we have taken important positions in international relations, regardless of whether they found favor with the big, powerful neighbor to the north. And so this is why I'm saying it was sad, because we have now, the government of Trinidad and Tobago has now decided that they have to, well, they think they have to, we don't think they have to, but that they have engaged with open, direct support for US policy of aggression in this region. And so it was sad that we have gone this route, and it's shameful given the proud record of Trinidad and Tobago in taking positions on principle.
Yeah, and it has implications for I would say, unified positions from other member countries in the CARICOM region, because there are arrangements in place as to how we operate one with the other in terms of these. But before we get to that, let me just again quote from the statement you issued on the matter. You say the Prime Minister swallowed the Trump administration's position in this deployment. This is the deployment of this military vessel with military assets on board. You said that it is to deal. They said it to deal with terrorist drug cartels, and that is not the case. Ayola, as the people would say, dumping that.
Yes, and there's always ongoing collaboration between the United States and Trinidad and Tobago and other CARICOM countries on the question of drugs and narco trafficking. And MSA, of course, is totally opposed to human trafficking, narco and drug trafficking in arms, and so on. So that activity is law enforcement activity, where, say, the US DA, which is here in Trinidad and Tobago, together with the Coast Guard and so on, US Coast Guard would collaborate with national security agencies here in Trinidad and Tobago to deal with narco trafficking. I think even in today's press, I was reading it today, there was a statement about collaboration between the US and Trinidad and Tobago. Oh, it was in relation to the deportation of two Americans. I don't know if they were dual citizens, two Williams, a man and a woman, to the United States. And the US Embassy here issued a statement saying this is a good example of the kind of collaboration between Trinidad and Tobago and the US. And you recall not too long ago, there was a major drug bust in Spain of a vessel, a yacht that left Trinidad and went to Spain with a huge amount of cocaine on board. And when that drug bust took place, again, statements were made that this was collaboration between Trinidad and Tobago security agencies and the United States and other countries and so on. So this is ongoing. The Coast Guard regularly seizes drugs in the region, often in collaboration. And there was the tragic situation, you recall, of some kind of homemade submarine where a Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard officer perished when the two officers boarded the vessel. A number of persons were taken into custody by the Coast Guard, but before they left their vessel, they pulled a plug or something like that, so the vessel sank. And one of the Coast Guard officers was able to get off the vessel, another one didn't, and perished, and his remains are still in that watery grave. So all of this is in collaboration. So there's ongoing collaboration. And if there's a need to strengthen the fight against narco trafficking, no problem. But do that with normal law enforcement agencies. In other words, the US could strengthen Coast Guard presence in the Caribbean. They can give us more, in terms of CARICOM countries, more resources for us to also participate in that collaborative effort. But when you talk about 3 destroyers with guided missile cruisers, a nuclear submarine, and amphibious vessels, 4,500 Marines, that is not about law enforcement. Those are offensive military assets. Offensive, not in the sense that they offend, but offensive in terms that they are designed to attack other countries, right? Or if a country would try to attack the United States, to defend the United States, yes? So guided missiles are not meant to take out some ship that is traversing the Caribbean Sea with drugs. Guided missiles are meant to take out military targets, on land or other military naval vessels and so on. So those are offensive assets, and the only reason that you deploy offensive assets is either to attack another country, or perhaps defend your territory, as the case may be. And so this issue of narco trafficking is really, in our view, a false narrative, but it is a narrative that can be used to create the support for such military action. But it's a false narrative. And the US, you and I are old enough, Andy, and of course you are a very experienced journalist, so you would recall the Iran-Contra wars, and the United States engaged in drug trafficking. The CIA and other agencies of the US engaged in drug trafficking out of South America and elsewhere in order to finance the Contras who were fighting against the government of the Sandinistas in Nicaragua, and also to support the El Salvador right-wing government and its army in fighting against the Farabunde Martin Liberation Movement that was very, very close to winning power at that time. So the US has no moral authority to talk about narco trafficking when they themselves, as a state, not talking about their citizens, we're talking about as a state, has been engaged itself in narco trafficking in its own perceived interests.
Yeah, and you have a counter idea, I would say, because you asked the question, to destroy what drug cartel and in which country, or is it to effect a naval blockade of Venezuela contrary to international law? You think that is it leaves you, let's put it this way, and your organization no alternative but to figure that this is more like what is in mind, what is being had in mind?
Yes, and you recall again, Andy, that a naval blockade was done by the United States against Nicaragua. They blockaded the Nicaraguan port, which, from memory, the International Court of Justice ruled was illegal. But of course, there was no sanction against the US for that naval blockade as an attempt to strangle at that time the Sandinista government. So there is a possibility of a naval blockade because the US has sanctioned Venezuela in many different ways. And maybe they think that one thing they could do to further dent the Venezuelan economy, which, by the way, has been growing over the last 3 or 4 years. And the economic situation in Venezuela is far improved from where it was, say, 5, 6 years ago, when it was in deep crisis, and which crisis caused a lot of Venezuelans to leave because their economic circumstances were very dire. But the economy has developed. The food situation has improved tremendously. I mean, I was there in January very briefly, and I didn't move around a lot, but you could see stores were open. Food was, fresh vegetables and fruit were being sold on the side of the street by street vendors and so on. So that there were no long lines of people trying to get foodstuffs. So the situation in Venezuela has improved quite significantly. And maybe the US thinks that one way of dealing with that is a naval blockade to further create economic difficulty and therefore perhaps to help to encourage Venezuelans to protest and revolt against the government.
Yeah, and you take a position on the basis of the fact that it is your conclusion, your organization's conclusion, that whereas the President of the United States has not proffered a proper, maybe an acceptable sort of reason and rationale for what he's done. You say our Prime Minister endorses the action, and you say that she should say in clear words who is the target, what is the cartel, and in which country in the region it really is under focus.
Yes, as I said, the US has been ambiguous on this. They have not explicitly said that they are going after individual A or B or country XY. They simply said they're going after narco traffickers. They have, however, given suggestions about what it is about because the Trump administration doubled the bounty, which is really a very offensive thing, on the head of President Maduro. Biden had put it on of $25 million US, and then Trump upped it to $50 million US. And I'll just make one point in that regard in terms of the hypocrisy and duplicity of the United States, because they put a $50 million bounty on President Maduro's head, but yet Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, is welcomed with open arms, was welcomed both by Biden and by Trump to the White House. He addressed a joint sitting of the U.S. Congress, the House and the Senate, received standing ovations on several occasions during that address. And he has a warrant issued not by a single country, but by the International Criminal Court because they want to try him for crimes against humanity, war crimes, and genocide. And the International Court of Justice has also sanctioned him. So here you have two international bodies under the umbrella of the United Nations. And I want to remind Trinidad and Tobago that the International Criminal Court was the initiative of former Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, A.N.R. Robinson, who campaigned tirelessly for it and succeeded in getting a lot of countries to sign on to what is known as the Treaty of Rome to bring the International Criminal Court into existence. So we have a vested interest in ensuring that decisions of the International Criminal Court are upheld. And the Prime Minister of Israel does have a warrant out for his arrest by a recognized international body, yet he's welcome in the United States. And on the other hand, the US unilaterally places this so-called bounty on the head of President Maduro. It's duplicity and hypocrisy to the highest order.
Yeah, and then there's another of the many critical points you've raised. One of them has to do with the Prime Minister's declaration that Trinidad and Tobago is looking after its own interests, how it sees fit, and that other CARICOM member states can do likewise, and they could take whatever position they want. And you describe that as sort of vacating arrangements for collaborative efforts in matters such as these among CARICOM member states.
Yes, I mean, no, she did make a point which has some validity, which is that A number of CARICOM countries signed on to a statement as part of another hemispheric group, which is known as ALBA TCP, which statement was condemnatory of the U.S. military deployment and supportive of Venezuela's sovereignty. Now, on the other hand, however, what Prime Minister Prasad Bisesa went on to say, and this is what was disturbing, was that she has not engaged and does not intend to engage with CARICOM on this matter. Now, assuming that different countries have different positions and may have even expressed different positions, a head of government in CARICOM should not close the door shut on discussions with her colleague prime ministers and or discussions at the level of CARICOM foreign ministers, having regard to the Treaty of Chaguaramas, the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, of course, which is the legal institutional framework under which CARICOM is established and to which Trinidad and Tobago is a signatory. And in the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, as an objective, it does speak to the issue of collaboration on matters of foreign policy and establishes, to give effect to that, a Council of Foreign and Community Relations. And the Council of Foreign and Community Relations explicitly is supposed to take responsibility for arriving at common positions of importance, of global and regional and hemispheric importance. Now, of course, the heads of government often can supersede the Council on Foreign Relations, and therefore one would have expected that there be a heads of government meeting by Zoom urgently. That hasn't happened, perhaps because the current chair of CARICOM is Prime Minister Andrew Holness of Jamaica, and he's in the middle of not in the middle, he's near the end of an election campaign. I think elections in Jamaica are on Wednesday. So, but that ought not to prevent him from summoning a meeting of the heads. And it's very, very unfortunate that CARICOM has made no statement, or there apparently has been no meeting of CARICOM heads. And maybe that is because also the Trinidad and Tobago Prime Minister says she's not interested and will not engage, and therefore has thrown a spanner in the works of having any kind of discussion at the level of CARICOM. And this is not good. And I heard her statement, I think, yesterday. She's been doubling down on her original statement when she says she's putting Trinidad and Tobago first. Now, Andy, I know you travel right throughout the Caribbean, right? I'm sure you go into supermarkets in the Caribbean. And anybody who's tuned in, they're going to a supermarket in the Caribbean, be it in Grenada, or St. Vincent, or Barbados, or Antigua, wherever, Jamaica. What you see on the shelves in the supermarket are a lot of Trinidad and Tobago manufactured goods, because the fact of the matter is that outside of energy, our manufacturing sector exports primarily, in terms of volume and value, go to CARICOM countries. And therefore, for us to say Trinidad and Tobago first, and well, CARICOM take the back seat or the low road or whatever it is a absolutely wrong policy position. Because if the other CARICOM heads say, well, if that is Trinidad and Tobago's position, perhaps we shouldn't be buying all of these goods from Trinidad and Tobago, because a lot of the other countries say that Trinidad and Tobago has such a large trade surplus. In other words, we export more to CARICOM than we import from CARICOM. They may say we're not going in that direction anymore, and we'll import from somewhere else. And what that will mean is a loss of jobs and a loss of foreign exchange for Trinidad and Tobago. So we cannot talk about Trinidad and Tobago first without recognizing that Trinidad and Tobago's well-being, its economic sustainability and well-being, and the well-being of our citizens is tied up with the regional integration process. And it's very important, because in the context of this globalized world, where, particularly post-Trump, 2.0, where Trump is doing his own thing with tariffs and trying to restructure world trade and a whole set of other things like that, that small states like ours really best survive, or have the best chance of survival, in the context of being part of a larger group. And for us, that larger group is CARICOM.
Yeah, I wanted, before we go further, I wanted to ask you, there's this how do you put that? The principle, if you like, of something called the law of the sea. and that certain parts of the oceans belong to certain countries or certain groups of countries. To what extent this issue is making help for that, and where the vessel is at the moment, whose part of the law of the sea is being engaged there.
That's a key question, Andy. I saw a letter to the editor in yesterday's Express from Stephen Kangle. Now, Mr. Kangle and I don't agree on everything, obviously, because he has different positions on foreign relations than I do. But he's a former Foreign Service officer, as far as I know.
Yes.
And he had a very interesting letter to the editor with a map of the Caribbean, and said that essentially there is no part of the Caribbean Sea that is really international waters, because the territorial limits for Venezuela and of other Caribbean countries, of course, there are boundaries between us. But if you add up all of that, there's very little in between what is the territorial waters of Jamaica or Dominican Republic or Haiti or the Eastern Caribbean, Trinidad and Tobago, and that of Venezuela. And therefore, he's suggesting that there are no international waters for these naval assets to be parked in. I'm just repeating his letter. I don't have any other facts to suggest otherwise, and I have not been able to do my own independent research of it. But it's a very interesting proposition by Stephen Kangle, who is not necessarily somebody who supports or defends the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, from previous letters that you have written. Yeah.
Yeah, I've known him fairly well over the years when I covered Trinidad and Tobago's foreign relations activities and so on. And yeah, he's quite independent in his thinking. But the issue is then where this vessel is. Nobody can claim that it is in their or our waters. Is that is one of the issues?
Well, based upon what, and I hadn't thought about it previously until I read Stephen's letter to the editor yesterday, the statement by the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago that she would allow U.S. military vessels into Trinidad and not into only our waters, but allow their military assets to be on our land if there was an attack by Venezuela on Guyana. I'm now wondering whether, and I have no evidence or proof, now wondering whether that statement was not to allow the U.S. vessels to be in Trinidad and Tobago waters close to Venezuela, because of the issue of the absence of international waters near Venezuela, raised by Stephen Kangle. Yes, so I'm adding up one on one. I don't know if that equals two. It may not. Yes, so I'm not putting my head on a block for that, but I'm just saying that, in the absence of more information and more details, we are left to speculate on a number of these disturbing things. The other thing is that the Prime Minister in her statement started talking about, which the United States has not done at all, the attack. If there's an attack on Guyana by Venezuela, Trinidad and Tobago's territory should allow the U.S. to use Trinidad and Tobago's territory. Now, the U.S. has not spoken about the border conflict between Guyana and Venezuela in relation to the deployment of these military assets. They have only said it's about narco trafficking. So I'm again, now one is left to speculate whether or not there could be what is known as a false flag event. In other words, that there's some incident on the border between Guyana and Venezuela, which is then the narrative is that was a Venezuelan incursion or Venezuelan attack on Guyana, and therefore there is now the legitimate quote unquote reason for U.S. intervention in Venezuela, and Trinidad and Tobago will have already given its approval for the U.S. to.
Yeah, and
as a staging point. So it's very concerning. All of this is very, very concerning.
Yeah, because that brings in the issue of Venezuela's sort of encroachment or its threats about taking over. This was the 2/3 of Guyanese territory because, well, what they have said, that is areas that belong to them. They've never agreed to, any of the proposals that have been made over a long time as to who has ownership of that piece of the territory, and to what extent that is how people are seeing it, that for whatever reason the United States under this Trump 2.0 taking the position that they are going to go and get something going on behalf of Guyana.
Yes, I mean, the position of the MSA's position, and we stated this quite some time ago, around the time when Prime Minister Gonzalez had that major meeting dialogue between President Irfan Ali of Guyana and President Maduro of Venezuela, and a number of CARICOM heads of government were present. And also there was online, I think, participation from the President of Brazil, Lula, and the UN Secretary General. And we said that we support CARICOM's position, which is firstly that the Essequibo is part of Guyana, and that, my Venezuelan friends and so on, disagree with me on that, but I've made my position clear, or MSA's position clear, that we don't think that that is part of Venezuela, unless, of course, there is a ruling by the International Court of Justice on that matter that rules against Guyana, yes? Because we think that is the only way for it to go, unless there's some bilateral agreement, which doesn't seem to be possible. And I've said quietly to my Venezuelan friends that the rhetoric about by the government of Venezuela on the Essequibo and so on, did not help their friends in the Caribbean to support them, the governments I'm talking about, yes, to support Venezuela, because CARICOM governments have been very important in supporting Venezuela in international fora against the sanctions, against other acts of aggression by the United States and so on, the attempt to seat Juan Guaido as the president. A number of CARICOM governments came out and supported Venezuela on those important issues. So that to alienate CARICOM on this question of Guyana and so on is not a good thing. But I understood the rhetoric initially in terms of the internal politics of Venezuela, because it is an issue not just for the Maduro government, it is a Venezuelan issue. And many ordinary Venezuelans have, over the years, have believed and do believe, verily believe, based upon their own understanding of events and so on, that the Essequibo is part of Venezuela. And so it became a political flashpoint issue in elections, and therefore I could see somebody campaigning, President Maduro and so on, that he could not appear to be conceding the Essequibo, because the opposition would have seized on that and said, well, he's allowed us, Venezuela, to lose all of this territory. So I could understand all of that. But certainly the continued rhetoric around this issue. But there hasn't been anything in this period to suggest that there's any, and Venezuela has never made any aggressive attempt to go into Guyana, right? They've never made that attempt. So, and the US has not raised that issue whatsoever in its rationale for deploying the troops. It has always been about this so-called war against narco trafficking. And then we had yesterday this media, well, it wasn't a press conference, I don't know what it was, a cabinet meeting at which statements were being made. And the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, sitting next to Trump, spoke about their war on narco traffickers and said they have now an international alliance coalition. And he mentioned 5 countries. Now, 5 countries is not an international coalition, right? By the stretch of the imagination. But so two CARICOM countries, Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana, were mentioned in this coalition against narco trafficking. And 3 South American countries were listed or named: Argentina, Paraguay, and Ecuador. Now, that is bad company for Trinidad and Tobago to keep. Ecuador is the most violent country in this hemisphere. And, people contesting elections in Ecuador, including presidential candidates, have been shot down and killed in the street outside their campaign headquarters or during campaign rallies. There have been prison riots, massive prison riots, where they have to declare states of emergency and send in troops and so on and so on. And the UN reports on drugs, because there is a UN Commission on Drugs that reports every 2 years or so. Their last report, which was published in June of this year, says that Ecuador is really the main exporter of cocaine into the United States. And they do that not coming east into the Caribbean, but they do that through their Pacific coast, going up to the north. So I don't know why we want to be in company with Ecuador. Ecuador is not engaged really in the fight against narco trafficking. They have to clean up their own act first. Argentina is under an extreme right government. The president, Milei, his ratings are the lowest ever of a president for how many decades. He patterns himself after Trump and has cut senior citizens' pensions. Senior citizens have been protesting in the streets of Buenos Aires and other cities, have been tear gassed and beaten by the police as they try to defend their small pensions given inflation. Teachers and university lecturers have been going on strike, and other public sector workers on strike and so on. There are major crises of their health sector, the education sector, and so on. Is that a country that we really want to be in company with? And Paraguay is not a great country either in terms of its history of human rights and democracy. It was under dictatorship for many, many years. And also it was run or led by people who had very close ties with Nazi Germany, in years gone by, the Coronado Party, very racist and so on. That is bad company for Trinidad and Tobago to be in. And I think, Andy, well, I'm glad you're asking me about these things, but quite apart from me speaking about it, I think the media have to challenge some of these things and provide information for the public of Trinidad and Tobago to get, a clear understanding of the implications of all of this.
Yeah, I want to ask about that. What has this position taken by the government and the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago? What are the potentials for that to lead back to a fresh period of sort of arguing and pulling and tugging among ourselves in the Caribbean? But also, I know I've seen quite a bit of reporting out of the last elections in Venezuela, which lead me to think that it was not as free and fair as it should be, not as free and fair as we have come to know elections to be in this part of the world. I don't know what your feeling is on that, and whether it has been disproved. So that and how does this matter affect relations, the smoothness of relations in CARICOM, given the Prime Minister saying, well, every man for his own where this is concerned. And that's not how we have come to be doing business with ourselves over these last couple of decades.
Yeah. Well, with respect to the latter question, certainly I think CARICOM is in trouble at this moment. I saw a press conference, I think it was online, with the Prime Minister of St. Lucia a short while ago, Honorable Philip Pear, and he was saying that St. Lucia is very concerned about the situation, but they wish to deal with it within the context of CARICOM and under the provisions of the Treaty of Chaguaramas. And he said that is the way for us to go. He doesn't want to engage in any, unilateral decisions and so on. And so obviously that he was expressing a view, which would have been critical of the position of the Prime Minister of Trinidad without saying he was criticizing a fellow head of government. At a CARIFESTA forum a couple of days ago, at which Prime Minister Motley was present, Prime Minister Ralph Gonzalez was a panelist, Sir Hilary Beckles, Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies, Ambassador June Suma, former Secretary General of the Association of Caribbean States, and now I think the UN the lead of the UN Committee on Reparations, or the People with African Descent, one of those commissions, and also the Secretary General of CARICOM were all part of that. And Prime Minister Gonzalez made the point that these are matters that he really would prefer to be discussed behind closed doors within CARICOM. Yes, and Prime Minister Motley reiterated concern about the situation and said that we must maintain the Caribbean as a zone of peace. So you're getting different statements by different CARICOM leaders, but reiterating some important positions, including that the Caribbean should be a zone of peace. Prime Minister Heerah also made that statement in his press conference today. So we need to see whether there's going to be a meeting of CARICOM, but I think, we're in a difficult situation, as happened, for example, in 1983, when CARICOM divided very badly over the issue of the U.S. invasion of Grenada. After Maurice and the others were assassinated. Because there was this famous CARICOM summit, emergency summit, up at the Hilton here in Trinidad and Tobago, because Prime Minister Chambers was then the chair of CARICOM. And I remember the late John Donaldson meeting myself and Aaron McLeod, because we were discussing arrangements for the holding of a memorial service for Maurice and the other matters. And that actually took place at the Holy Trinity Cathedral in Port of Spain. My dad, of course, being Yankan Bishop, facilitated that. And we met with John D to make arrangements for a number of notable people to come in, including Maurice's mother, Maurice's sister, George Lamming. And you may have heard Prime Minister Motley refer to the Banyan Archive, saying you could hear George Lamming's eulogy for Maurice Bishop. Well, that was at the Holy Trinity Cathedral in Port of Spain, and that service that myself and other colleagues in the OBQ organized. And John D talked about what happened at that CARICOM meeting, when there was consensus on the need to have a CARICOM initiative to deal with Austin and Cord and the others who had established this Revolutionary Military Council, and to try to get them to give up that power and to have some transitional arrangement and so on under CARICOM's guidance. And while that consensus was being developed, Eugenia Charles, Tom Adams, Eddie Siaga were outside the room talking to Washington.
Yes, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, to see it not as a U.S. invasion, because I tell people forget that Eugenia, while the other leaders were remaining in Port of Spain trying to find a way around it, she went to Washington and was sitting there with Bush when he talked about U.S. troops landing in and also Barbados was the landing point for them, and then you go from every morning you go to the airport in Barbados, Grantley Adams, to see if you could get to go to Grenada. I was part of that.
Yes.
So that,
Yes. So
Eugenia Charles.
Yes, Eugenia Charles. Yes, and that fractured CARICOM for a very long time. Yes, and really it was only like when Prime Minister Robinson became Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, and there was they met in Grand Anse, that Robinson then proposed a process to get CARICOM back on its feet and in a new direction. And that is what led to the establishment of the West Indian Commission, chaired by Sir Sridhar Ramphal, and having people like Alistair McIntyre and a lot of other notables on it. And they produced the report Time for Action. Yes. So it took CARICOM a while to catch itself after 1983. And this now suggests another fracture, which is not good, particularly in the context of Trump 2.0 and a global uncertainty as the US hegemony is being challenged by the rise of China and the BRICS and so on. And interestingly, today, 50% tariffs went on to India because the Indian government has refused to stop buying Russian oil. And Trump said, well, okay, we're going to put 50% tariff. But Prime Minister Modi was here just the other day, and we were full of praise of his visit, and he was full of praise of Trinidad and Tobago and the Prime Minister and so on. Modi did not back down in the face of Trump's threats. He's continued to buy US oil. And Lula has also, Brazil, 50% tariffs on Brazil. Why? Because Trump says that Jair Bolsonaro, who is before the courts in Brazil, shouldn't be before the courts. And Brazil said, no, you can't determine what our sovereign right to and our justice system is about to then punish us with with 50% tariffs, we're not backing down. You know,
Yeah.
so I mean, there are bigger countries than ours, but at some point, you have to stand up for what is right. You know.
Okay, I know you gotta go. I know we're getting up to the top of the hour, but let's
Yeah.
quickly though. You think when all is said and done, given our culture, political and otherwise in the region, that the region's leaders at this point will get back around the table, irrespective of the position taken by the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, because that is just who we are, and that is just how we operate in the region.
Yeah, it will happen, I suppose, after the elections, both in Guyana and Jamaica. I saw a poll out of Guyana. The PPP Civic seems to be ahead, though it may not win an absolute majority of votes or an absolute majority in the House, but they have enough to win the presidency and so on. In Jamaica, I think it's going to be very close. I was in touch with a colleague of mine who's, being quite close to the PNP. He said it's going to be very close in Jamaica. Can't determine which way to go. But I think after those elections, there will be some attempt to get things together. But of course, a lot of mediation will have to take place in that regard. The damage has already been done to Trinidad and Tobago's reputation that we would allow U.S. troops to be on our soil. That is not a good statement. Just a very quick comment, Andy, about the Venezuelan elections. I didn't respond to you on that. From the reports that we had, and there were people from Trinidad and Tobago who went across, it would seem as if those elections were free and fair. The issue is that the opposition has always had difficulty coming together and uniting sufficiently to defeat Maduro and the PSUV. And because the economy has been on the improve, the situation politically for President Maduro was better than it would have been, say, 3-4 years ago, where it might have been very difficult for him to win an election against a united opposition, given the economic crisis at that time. But we don't have time to explore that more fully now. And the last thing I want to say, one disturbing thing about the Prime Minister's second statement, when she doubled down on her first statement, and she had repeated it again to one of the media here yesterday, that people who are speaking about a zone of peace somehow have come out of the woodwork, and that the narco traffickers have found a way to get people into positions in different levels of society here and also in the Caribbean. That's a very dangerous statement, because you're suggesting that people like myself, who consistently speak against the U.S. colonial and imperial agenda, which agenda is part of the Monroe Doctrine. We don't have time to get into all of that. But also who are talking about the Caribbean being a zone of peace, and we oppose any military intervention in the region, are somehow part or doing the proxy work of narco traffickers. And I detest that intensely. And I publicly said on Morning Edition this morning, so I'll repeat it with you, that to the Prime Minister, call my name. Don't do it in Parliament either. Call it outside and say David Abdullah, who is advocating for the Caribbean being a zone of peace and opposed to U.S. colonial and imperial agenda and defending the Caribbean sovereignty and so on, that I am doing the work of some narco trafficker. I dare the Prime Minister to say that publicly.
Yes, and I look for another opportunity to talk about the fact that the current government is made up of several people who come from backgrounds and I would say routes of endeavor, just like you. And one wonders what their real position is on some of these issues, and we will see to what extent that will present any room for movement or challenges of any sort. But David, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Andy, for having me on. So, Charles, we're having a regional press conference tomorrow morning. I sent out the release earlier today, hosted by the Assembly of Caribbean People. We'll have representatives from Haiti, Dominican Republic, Cuba, myself speaking. And we are issuing a declaration to the Caribbean people, and we are going to be making some calls for action. That's 10 o'clock Trinidad and Tobago time tomorrow. And there'll be interpretation in 4 languages: Creole, French, Spanish, and English. So I hope you could log into that. It's an online press conference. And I sent the link to Sir Charles as well. So
yeah, I got it. Yeah, I got
Great.
it.
Thanks, Sir Charles. I appreciate it.
Okay, no problem.
Right.
Thanks a lot, David.
All right. Thank you very much, David Abdullah, political leader of the Movement for Social Justice on the matter of the intra-regional, what should I say, dialogue or query or quarrel taking place among leaders in one place or the other about the issue of U.S. A U.S. Ship with forces, with material, with hardware, the question of a challenge against Venezuela. Stay with us right here. We'll be back after the song. New Era Radio, Trinidad and Tobago.
CRS Calypso Productions presents Revival the Concert 5, paying tribute to two Calypso icons, Maestro and Brother Valentino, happening on Saturday 30th August 2025. Special performance by none other than Brother Valentino himself. Featured performers will be King Luther, Cardinal, Exposer, Kinte, Emba, Hamedullah, Lady Listra, Roxy Singh, Brother Mac, Travis the Artist, Tall Blacks, The Messenger, and Sheldon Nugget. Also DJ Cool Moody and more. Taking place at Pleasantville Community Center. Early bird tickets are $150 until the 20th of July. Then it's $200. Time is from 8 p.m. Tickets available at Sion's, Royal Road, and Ateliers by the Park. Or contact 343-5182 or 492-1066. You don't want to miss this one.
Arima, get ready for the Arima Independence Picnic and Family Day this Sunday, August 31st from 3 p.m. to 10 p.m. at the Arima Velodrome. Come celebrate Trinidad and Tobago's 63rd anniversary of independence. And guess what? It's absolutely free. Bring the whole family and enjoy religious and cultural performances, picnic vibes, family fun, food and drinks, free bouncy castle and face painting for the kids, plus lots of prizes and surprises. Yes, your coolers are allowed, so pack your picnic baskets, bring your friends, and come celebrate unity, culture, and joy in Arima. Don't miss it. It's Arima Independence Picnic and Family Day this Sunday, August 31st at the Arima Velodrome, 3 to 10 p.m. and it's absolutely free. Happy Independence!
Longclair Auto Services Limited, your one-stop auto repair shop, located at number 1 Industrial Lane, Champlain, right opposite the brewery on the Eastern Main Road. Yes, we do it all. Repairs to all makes and models. Your everyday sedan to SUVs, high trucks, pickups, and panel vans. We're also the sole distributors of Davanti tires, certified VTS inspection station, plus a wide range of services: oil change, front end and suspension repairs, tune-ups, tire alignment, batteries, electrical work, radiator and cooling system, AC repairs, and accessories galore. We offer pickup and drop-off service too. Call us today at 662-6545 or 662-6572. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Champlain Auto Services Limited, number 1 Industrial Lane, Champlain. We do it all.
Advertise with us on New Era TT Radio, the fastest growing streaming platform for talk in Trinidad and Tobago. Audio and video ads welcome. Elevate your brand with us. Connect with us at newerattradio@yahoo.com or call us at 299-5156. Now what are you waiting for?
All right, everybody, as we welcome you back to the Drive Time Exchange here on New Era TT Radio. Good to be here with you. Remember, you can pick us up on newerattradio.com. We stream all day, every day, public holidays included, right? And of course, New Era TT Radio, you can get us on TuneIn, so that way you'll be able to get us on all your Alexa and Google devices. Of course, you can also go up to our YouTube channel where all these shows will be there. those in the past. And on like this show, you'll be able to view it at any point in time. It's available to you. And when you're there, like and subscribe the channel. Okay. So we are back, Andy. So it's all yours.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm being joined now by Mr. Clyde Weatherhead, another former trade union, I was going to say leader, but certainly in the leadership of the Public Services Association. He's come among other things literally, and he continues to share in the civic responsibility of people like himself, keeping in touch with what's happening and making statements, writing pieces that appear in the paper, and his willingness to have us discuss some of these things I want to admire is after 63 years, how you feel. That's the headline that was put on a piece that he wrote that was carried in the Express on August 23rd. It has to do with the fact that so we getting ready to pay attention to and to pay respects to ourselves and the democracy that we have after 63 years of independence. And you raised some questions in there. We know the fact that this year things aren't going to be celebrated as they usually have over the years, and that's a discussion and argument in itself. But let's get to the position he's taken here. After 63 years, how do you feel? Let me just read one paragraph in the piece here.
Andy, just let me interrupt you for one moment. Mr. Weatherhead, do you have like a fan or something blowing on your device?
The AC unit.
Yeah, something is it's if there's a fan, just move it away a little bit. It's blowing back on you.
I was hearing a kind of a roar of sort, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that there? Okay.
Yeah, that's a little better there. So let's go. Yeah, go ahead.
Better. At least I'm not hearing it too much.
Well, that was the AC unit. So, yeah.
Yeah. All right. So I'm there's some parts of it that I've sort of put a line by wanting to us first to have some discussion about specifically. And here's one of them according to the newspaper set out, it's the last column in the piece. How do you feel? How you feel after 63 years? And you talk about an area of darkness of our constitutional affairs as the president on the 50th anniversary described unresolved problems of establishing a free and equal union between Trinidad and Tobago. So that was couple of years ago, 50th anniversary. I said, well, a baker's dozen years since then. What do you think has changed? How has that been improved upon by what has transpired in terms of giving more autonomy, if you like, to the Tobago House of Assembly and giving greater voice to the people who say that, well, Tobago has to be able to stand, if not necessarily on its own feet, but in a better way than had been the case, let's say, 10 years ago?
Well, and the sad fact is that since the 50th anniversary, literally nothing has happened. I mean, some things took place, but as a result of what took place, nothing has happened. The PNM, having been in office for 10 years, brought 2 bills to the parliament with respect to what they call the Tobago self-government issue. And those 2 bills, the major one was never debated. I had submitted a view on it to the Joint Select Committee. I never received an acknowledgement, but when the bill got nowhere because it would have needed a special majority in the parliament, the Prime Minister actually called my name as one of the contributors to the Joint Select Committee. But my contribution was never acknowledged. I was never invited by the committee to further explain my views or anything like that. What also existed was that the PNM claimed that there was widespread consultation in Tobago conducted by the THA under the PNM's control. Well, from all reports, the consultation in Tobago that the PNM conducted was nowhere as widespread as those consultations that were conducted by a civil society committee headed by Reginald Dumas some years before. And Mr. Dumas had spent extensive amount of time discussing this issue. Many times he and I exchanged views or exchanged things that we were sending to the newspapers on the issue. But his committee held really extensive discussions throughout Tobago. This PNM consultation, they said it was going to include Tobago and Trinidad. But I don't know if you recall that only once their team came to Trinidad and held a meeting at UB. And that was the only meeting in Trinidad. So there was a whole question as to how these bills were decided in Tobago. And the PNM's explanation was that the THA drafted these bills, sent them to the cabinet, and the cabinet, according to then PM Rowley, didn't change a single comma, but sent the bill straight on to Parliament. And like I said, the self-government bill required a special majority. And of course, the UNC was not going to vote for any special majority. And that was the end of that. So basically, nothing has changed.
And just to go back on your point about the contributions made by Mr. Reginald Dumas, the late, and may God bless his soul, that he was permanent secretary to the Prime Minister and head of the public service in Trinidad and Tobago, and then he retired and went to Tobago, I would say, for the express purpose of moving this issue along the line to the finish line, the question of autonomy for Tobago. What do you think hampered some of that with somebody like him, knowing the ropes in terms of getting things through the system politically and administratively? He and all was defeated, you would say?
Well, the problem was not what he did. In fact, there were several different committees in Tobago. But what his contribution was basically to amalgamate a lot of the different views and to present them in documented form. The problem is that, remember, you had the PNM in office, and then you had the UNC in office, and then you had the PNM back in office. And now you have the UNC back. Well, in this particular incarnation, the UNC hasn't even talked about Tobago, except I saw that one minister went to Tobago recently, I think last week or this week, and promised that there would be some advancing of the land tenure issue in Tobago. The question is that although a lot of documents were prepared in Tobago, there were several different draft bills coming out of not only the consultations led by Mr. Dumas, but others. The UNC, for their own purposes, and with the TOP as part of the PP in 2010 to 15, put forward a version of a bill for Tobago self-government in 2013, I think it was. But that bill didn't go anywhere either. I think the problem was that I don't think that either the PNM or the UNC completely understands the question of self-government for Tobago, the question of self-determination for Tobago, as Robinson put it when he first moved the motion in Parliament all those years before. And they have been both trying to impose their view of what this means on the people of Tobago, rather than, and the part of the problem is that the people of Tobago themselves do not have a single unified position on the issue. There are several people who have different views on it.
Yeah, you say here it is ironic that while we approach the 63rd anniversary, our rights are suspended under a second state of emergency for the year, and the government's claim is that it is giving us more rights under a dubious stand your ground bill that it is preparing to use the parliamentary majority to impose after sham consultations and no consultations with the MPs. But just before we go to that, I want to just delay on the Tobago thing a bit, so that the question of the party who is now in Tobago, the slight shade different from the last people who headed the assembly, that keeps the nudge towards self-government so ticking, and you're saying no, that may be just smoke and mirrors, as people say.
Well, the TPP of itself criticized the last bill of the PNM, but have not put forward any semblance of a bill of their own. And certainly since they've been in office, you know, where they got into office as the PDP, and then the majority of the members in the assembly left the PDP and formed the TPP. They have presented nothing new in terms of any bill or any conclusive document. They said they had some differences with the PNM bill, and they were going to expand on their views on it. But I have not seen or heard any document or any serious discussion since the TPP is in office on the question of self-government or autonomy for Tobago. In fact, recently the THA Chief Secretary had discussions with the cabinet or the Prime Minister, and from the newspaper reports, it appears that focused mostly on some money issues and some day-to-day issues of facing Tobago, and the question of the airport and stuff like that, when the airport opening and so on. So the question of autonomy has taken a kind of backseat once more.
Yeah. So when the ruling party's slogan for the last election was, when the UNC wins, everybody wins. There are people who are pointing at areas where that is yet to be even noticed that is happening. On the Tobago question, what has to happen?
Well, the UNC didn't even contest any seat in Tobago in the first place. So the two TPP candidates are in the parliament. As far as I can make out, they're not officially part of the so-called UNC coalition of interest. They sit in the parliament on the side of the government, but they are not government MPs. So the question is that at this stage, there needs to be a clear position from the people of Tobago as to what they understand that the issue of autonomy means. And two, that has to be translated into a bill that will amend the Tobago House of Assembly Act and the Constitution in ways that recognize the autonomy of Tobago. You see, I have presented a view over the years into Trinidad and to Tobago audiences that this is a question of two nations that were put into a forced union by the colonial masters, not because of any push by Trinidad or Tobago to be put together, but for the convenience of the British, who were claiming they had some financial difficulties running the two separately, so they put Tobago with Trinidad. And they didn't put Tobago as a ward of Trinidad, they put Tobago as a ward of Trinidad and Tobago. That's what the order in council says. But previously, remember, for the British Empire, for its convenience, Tobago was linked with Barbados and Grenada and so on. And then finally they said, okay, well, we'll put it with Trinidad. So we call it Trinidad and Tobago will be a ward of Trinidad and Tobago. But that was decided in London. It wasn't decided by the people in Tobago or in Trinidad. So that union literally was a forced union. And it was an unequal union. And the inequality of the union was very clear when Williams, because of the outcome of election in Tobago years ago, created the Ministry of Tobago Affairs and literally abandoned Tobago to his own devices for a long time. So the unequalness of the relationship did not improve with independence. And the president at that time, at the 50th anniversary, who was Max Richards, he said in his speech on the 50th anniversary, this remains an area of darkness of our constitutional affairs. And it certainly needs at this stage, one, for the people of Tobago to decide what is the position of Tobago on this issue, and two, for the legislation to be drafted affecting both the Constitution and the THA Act to deal with the issue of creating a free and equal union between Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah, I want to read something you wrote in the piece here about the state of affairs and the questions that you ask. Once again, these two sides of the ruling political party monopoly have succeeded in distracting us citizens from a serious, deep analysis of what our country has achieved or not after 6 decades of self-rule. You ask, what is the state of our foreign or sovereignty? Have we, the people, come any closer to achieving our sovereign right to control our nation's affairs? Or is the notion that sovereignty lies in the parliament, a la the British notion of constitutionality, which deprives the people of political control of the affairs of our country and society? That is taking the country together, Trinidad and Tobago, and apart from Tobago alone. And you would say that, I conclude from what you're saying there, that the situation is worse in Tobago for people who live and work there than it is from those of us in Trinidad.
Well, the situation in Tobago is only worse in the sense that the problem of the relationship between Tobago and Trinidad has not been resolved. And based on that and that unequal union, the people of Tobago suffer some disadvantages. For example, one of the issues discussed last week between the minister who went there and the THA was this question of people having to come to Trinidad to deal with registration of deeds. The Registrar General Office in Tobago did not have an adequate deputy registrar over there. I know that when the PP left office in 2015, there was a beefing up of the Registrar General's office in Tobago. I don't know what happened in the last 10 years, why it fell back again. So the people of Tobago have to literally come to Trinidad. I've heard some people saying, as recently as last week, one woman was saying how many times she has to come to Trinidad for the year just to conduct normal business. And I mean, she can't do many things in Tobago that she should be able to do there. So that is that aspect of the issue. What I raise here about sovereignty, and it is illustrated again with the recent developments with this American armada coming down to Venezuela and the position taken by the government and the Prime Minister. There's no discussion, not even in the Parliament, about that issue. So they will say the Parliament is on vacation, so they didn't discuss it. And even in the Cabinet, you're not too sure that there was a discussion, because the government's position started off with the foreign minister saying, we keeping out of that. We neutral. And a couple of days later, there's a statement from the prime minister that is 2 pages long that really could have been one, because the second page is just a repeat of the first, in which he is saying, no, we support the Americans bringing warships here. And then we hear from Rubio yesterday in the United States cabinet that Trinidad and Tobago is some part of a coalition, an international coalition against drug cartels. When did that happen? Nobody discussed that with us, the citizens of this country. Nobody even informed us that we were part of some coalition. So where is the sovereignty of Trinidad and Tobago? And when I speak of sovereignty here, I'm talking about the sovereign control. I'm not talking about space and stuff like that. In British constitutional law, it says that sovereignty lies in the parliament. In fact, it used to lie in the monarch before, right? So, in my view, sovereignty ought to lie with the people. And 1970 was about that. The biggest slogan of 1970 was power to the people.
Yeah, power to the people.
Right? But it seems that as the years have passed, that concept has disappeared. And we place so much emphasis on the parliament and which of one or two parties is going to be the boss in the parliament, that you have a stand your ground legislation that some people take to mean, based on the narrative of one party, that this is about everybody getting a gun and being able to shoot people who come in your property, and some other narrative coming from the other party that this is based on the racist kind of stand your ground law in America, and there's some racism behind this and so on. So the two of them put their narratives out there, and I'm sure 99% of the population of Trinidad and Tobago have not even read the bill. So
I'm going to go back on something. Yeah, I want to go back on something you said a moment ago, that one of the persons, the high-profile persons in the current U.S. administration under Trump, said something about us being part of an arrangement that we don't know anything about.
Yeah, a coalition of an international coalition led by the U.S. against drug cartels and narco trafficking. That's what he said in the cabinet in Washington yesterday, and it was on the media today. Yeah, but we don't know anything about any coalition, or we being part of any coalition.
Even as we debate the question of the government's position regarding this military vessel that is somewhere in the waters close enough to us, and the Prime Minister is defending it and saying, well, whoever outside of Trinidad and Tobago in the CARICOM has views that is, as my grandma would say, that F.A. them. That is our position.
I saw the main propaganda guy for the UNC, Kirk Mayhew, and Ravi Balgobin Maharaj today in a piece in the newspaper suggesting that, well, everybody in the Caribbean taking their own position with Petro-Caribbean and so on and so on. So what unity is there? And the Prime Minister herself said, well, don't blame me. CARICOM divided before now, so I ain't dividing it. So the issue is either we have a CARICOM or we don't. And if we do, whether it is we who are doing it, whether it's other countries who are taking unilateral positions, it can't be right that we doing it and wrong that somebody else doing it, or vice versa. It is wrong completely if we have a regional body and a regional real coalition of our nations, that individual countries could be taking separate positions. That cannot advance a collective regional position on anything.
And it ought to be that things like these ought to be behind us after 63 years. But we seem to have a lot of issues among ourselves in Trinidad and Tobago that is either on top or below the issues having to do with regional accord on some issues.
Yeah, well, Andy, I heard or I read somewhere today that where the U.S. was preparing to invade Grenada, and Eugenia Charles was championing the invasion.
Well, not championing. She was there in Washington D.C. She went. My view is she went directly from here. The CARICOM was meeting in Trinidad on the matter because this is we were
and that's the point. CARICOM was meeting, but the U.S. announced this armada coming down here, and it's not a ship or 3 ships. In fact, they announced yesterday they're sending more. So, and it includes a nuclear submarine and other stuff. So, why hasn't CARICOM found it possible since the U.S. announced this thing and since the first of these vessels arrived, I think on Sunday or thereabouts? Why hasn't CARICOM had an emergency meeting to discuss this? Instead, the Trinidad government says, well, we support it and everybody free to take their own position. That's not how a regional body works.
Yeah. But you think that will has to lead to some kind of a conclave among the governments in CARICOM at this point, because we've been there before in circumstances. Grenada in one case, for instance, and there's other things that tended to shred the unity, if there is, and the one voiceness among CARICOM leaders. You think that so we simply go from sort of period to period with the same kinds of challenges?
Well, the sad fact that is our history, and we say we united on this and that, and we strengthened CARICOM, and some of the smaller states, they go in ALBA and issue a statement. Then the Prime Minister of Trinidad issues a statement. Then the President of Guyana issues a statement. And in his statement, he is echoing the American position, where he says that the President of Venezuela is the head of, and he named the cartel that Rubio said that Maduro is the head of on August the 7th. So coincidentally, just a few days before they announced that our armada ships coming down here with 4,000 Marines to deal with drug cartels, they named Maduro as the head of a cartel. And then we all supposed to be so stupid that we think that if you say he's the head of a cartel and you're coming to fight cartels, it means you're just coming down here to say hello to Maduro and deal with the cartel ships in the sea. So how do you deal with the cartel vessels transporting drugs with guided missile destroyers and stuff like that? You need a guided missile to deal with a boat in the sea. That's the way the Zionists operate in Gaza. They said yesterday they attack a hotel and kill a whole set of people because they were concerned about a camera. So you use a missile and blow up a hotel to get rid of a camera.
Yeah. So what do you make of what should be happening on this issue of Venezuela, Guyana, the United States, this shipment of arms and people ready to go to war?
If the issue were about dealing with narco trafficking and dealing with drug cartels, we can't forget history, Andy. Since the 1980s, America has a war on drugs in Latin America.
Yeah.
So how come the cartel so strong now that you're coming in 2025 with battleships to try and deal with them? Are those cartels in the sea? Are those the people who organizing the drug trade in the sea, or are they somewhere on the land in Latin America? So you had American troops and military aid in Colombia and several other countries over the years. You had the Shipwrighter Agreement, which the UNC signed in 1996. You had the State of Forces Agreement, which PNM renewed in December last year. So all of these things are there. If America was really serious about dealing with narco trafficking and fighting the cartels, why hasn't Trump called a meeting of all the countries in Caribbean and Latin America and say, let's talk about working together to deal with this problem? Why take a unilateral position, send in military um, strength down to the Caribbean, and not just the Caribbean, off of Venezuela? So it makes me very clear that this is not about dealing with any cartels. And if it is about dealing with cartels, they have made sure to say Maduro is the head of a cartel. So it tells me that very largely possible is that they are about dealing with Maduro. So the question here is,
yeah.
in
Go
any
ahead.
event, having a whole set of American warships, and they're adding more this weekend, coming down into the Caribbean, and CARICOM's position is we are a zone of peace. Not Trinidad is a zone of peace, as our foreign minister said before the prime minister. If the Caribbean is a zone of peace, the question of peace means what to us in the Caribbean or to anybody? Can peace mean that anybody could send an armada of ships here? Or now they're saying, well, Russia sent some military planes to Venezuela some time ago, and nobody said that is against the peace. And well, I don't know if nobody said anything, but certainly I have said that neither of the superpowers, or none of them, in terms of Russia, China, and America, have any right to be imposing any military position on our region and our country in particular. So I don't know that people accept that one or the other of the superpowers could endanger us by putting their military hardware in our space, and we'll accept that. We can't.
But hasn't the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago accepted the fact that there is this U.S. piece
Well,
of
she
equipment
says she
there?
supports it because it is against drug cartels. So is that what it is against? If it
And
is,
there are
and like I
questions
said,
as to that. So
yeah,
if it is
if
to
it was that, Andy, I'm asking again, why didn't the Trump administration, just as they did when, remember, they sent Rubio himself came down to the Caribbean and went to a few countries, including ours, right?
yeah.
Why didn't they come and do that, or have a meeting with CARICOM and OAS or whoever, and say, well, let's talk about how we could deal with the drug cartels? If that is the motive, you don't just take a unilateral decision, we send in our armada military hardware down there, and say that is some kind of thing, and then we build in a coalition.
Yeah, but for whatever reason, and against what you may argue, the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago has legitimized. Well, I'm not sure if legitimizes the term, but embraced it and talking about being part of it. And if that is an issue for other leaders or other people in other countries in the CARICOM, that's a matter for them.
Yeah. That's her view, which is a view. Just like those who are in Alba going to issue a statement on the part of Alba, those in CARICOM, neither of them is strengthening CARICOM by doing that. Yesterday, I saw a former diplomat in a social media post saying, "Well, strengthening support for Guyana is strengthening CARICOM." I mean, what, who is supporting Guyana? Trinidad? How is that strength? How can the unilateral position of any CARICOM country be supporting CARICOM? You can't have that. Then it was passing strange that the only two Caribbean countries that issued statements in support of what America is doing is Trinidad and Guyana. And then suddenly Rubio is calling a list of countries he says is in part of this quote-unquote coalition and supporting. And the only two Caribbean countries included is Trinidad and Guyana. It's not a mystical thing that's happening. This is the reality. And we are once again dividing the Caribbean when we are all faced with the danger to the peace of this region. And I don't know if people think that being 7 miles from Venezuela, if for any reason some fighting with precision guided missiles and so on breaks out between Venezuela and Trinidad, you think nothing going to hit us, nothing going to affect us? And worse yet, if America comes here with their forces on our territory, as the Prime Minister says, she is going to give open arms if Venezuela attacks Guyana. Where did that Venezuela attacking Guyana story come from?
Well, I mean, it's not you don't think it will happen if Venezuela continues to claim that
No,
this
what
piece
does
of
that have to do with fighting and America bringing down the Armada here to deal with drug cartels? How does Guyana suddenly get inside here? The Prime Minister's statement, that repeated 2-page that is really should have been 1 page, suddenly sticks Guyana in there. It's like I said somewhere today, it's like out of the blue, Guyana appears in that issue about America and dealing with drug cartels. Has anybody talked about Guyana and drug cartels? Nobody. So where did that come from? But then when Rubio says that Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago, plus Argentina and some other Latin American countries, are assisting us and supporting us and part of the coalition in support of what we are doing in the best interest of America and so on and so on. So it makes sense only when you connect the dots that Guyana appears, because apparently the leaders of Trinidad and Guyana must have had some kind of discussion, because the question of Venezuela attacking Guyana was nowhere on the scene. America didn't come down here to say they're defending Guyana. They said they're coming to deal with narco cartel.
Yeah, but and that has been more or less debunked by people like yourself and so on. So if they're doing this under stealth, that maybe intelligence says that Maduro is making moves to act upon.
But America has never said that.
Yeah.
Right? That's not why they're here. They're not here to defend Guyana. They're here to deal with narco cartels. But our Prime Minister says, yes, I welcome that, to dealing with the drug cartels, because we can't deal with it ourselves and blah, blah, blah. And in the middle of saying that, says, well, if Venezuela attack Guyana, we will allow America to come on our territory and use it as a base to attack Venezuela. So if that happens, Andy, let's say it happens, and the Americans set up their base here, however they set it up, right? You think Venezuela will say, well, look at our American troops over there. That is the only target we are interested in Trinidad. We setting up ourselves to be a target
So we are endangering ourselves in Trinidad and Tobago more than is natural.
That's what it is. And if you to say that the Prime Minister's statement is causing to us to be endangered, there are people who are saying, well, the Prime Minister right, she taking a strong stand and we must stand with America because they are our biggest trading partner. So what? So we could die because America is our biggest trading partner? It makes no sense. What is the interest of Trinidad and Tobago that the Prime Minister says, well, for the next 5 years, we put in Trinidad and Tobago, the interest of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago first. You put in my interest first as a citizen by telling America you could come here and use here as a base to fight Venezuela, as though Venezuela would just sit down there and say, all right, forget Trinidad, America could sit down, send all the troops there and send planes there, let them take off and come and bomb retail, and we just cool with that because it's Trinidad. It's not logical, it's not sensible.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's a rough way to be spending our 63rd anniversary, wouldn't you say?
Yes, and the problem is that on the anniversary of independence, there is no forum organized by the government, by the PNM, by anybody to say, let us discuss what is the state of our independence after 63 years. But instead we worrying about whether it have a parade or fireworks and things like that.
All right, my friend. Well, we are 63 years old in terms of independence, and so much work to be done. Much work that should have been done isn't done. But we're gonna have to leave it there for now, my friend.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Clyde Weatherhead. After 63 years, how you feel? We will take a break. There's much more to come, or more to come on the program this afternoon. Stay with us.
Yeah, well, we are already here, and time is against us, and Dr. Heerah has been waiting for a little while, so I think we'd have to move straight into it, Andy.
All right. Well, thank you very much. So with us now, Garvin Heerah, somebody who writes about security issues in the paper, talks about it a lot. He's agreed to talk with us. There was a piece that he had in the last edition of the Sunday Express, Tension in the Atmosphere. We get into some of the details that he's raised in there, but welcome him to the discussion here on the station. Good to see you, my friend. I wasn't sure that you will. Well, you had a question of the time and so on, whether you would have been available. But thank you very much for making yourself available.
Yes, it's an honor to be part of the conversation, Andy. Thank you very much, and good evening to you, to the team, to Charles back there with the tech, and those who are listening and streaming, and of course following the program. So a very good evening to you, Andy, and again, a very important and critical conversation. Yes, the timing is tight for me. I did come back in just today, and I wanted to honor my word with you that I would give you the window. However, I only have until 1800, so I was in since 5:30.
Well, that's fine.
We can work with it. Not an issue.
All right. Well, let's talk about it. You talk about the assembling of the U.S. Marine Force, of U.S. Naval Force in our region is nothing new. The U.S. continues to have a presence, sometimes escalated, sometimes routine, sometimes with a specific operation agenda, but be it countering narcotics or what have you.
No.
But the question is, go ahead.
Yeah, and that point was made because it is not strange to have the U.S. Navy, U.S. Coast Guard, U.S. Maritime presence in the Caribbean Sea in our region. Part of the Caribbean-based incentive, the CBI, and then more importantly, joint operations not only with Trinidad and Tobago, with other Caribbean forces along the lines of counter narcotics, counter trafficking, policing the Caribbean Sea in an effort of peacekeeping, and of course law and order from the maritime perspective. What I went on to say is that it's not only the naval presence, but when you have a naval presence, there's an aviation presence. So there's aircraft in the air, helicopters flying, aircraft flying, patrolling, and with that size of assembling, we must pay attention that there's also a significant, what do you call aviation or air presence also which takes into account our airspace and our maritime domain awareness. So yes, we are a zone of peace, but with those type of assembling, we have to also understand, based on our civil aviation rules and responsibilities, zones of responsibility, we have a lot of aircraft flying around now in our airspace. And those are things that you just need to take into consideration. So it's not just a normal day, normal business, vessels anchored outside the any waters. This has gone to another level.
Yeah. I mean, and do we take on board the rationale that the U.S. authorities are giving? It has to do with drugs and drug cartels and so on. When some of us, other people, believe it's otherwise. It's the sense that Venezuela is making ready to claim its piece of the Essequibo as it says it wants to.
Yeah, well, clearly from my perspective, based on the analysis, based on the geopolitical analysis, there's more to it than counter narcotics. Yes, it was declared, and I echo the sentiments of my learned friend Clyde Weatherhead, that even the U.S. out of the White House, out of Washington, indicated about a joint coalition with other Latin American countries, including Guyana, and I think Argentina and some other countries, on a counter narcotics coalition. But you have to understand, and we would have known this historically, and even from the studies and the research, that the drug war is a never-ending war. You know, you will remove cartels, you will remove cartels' heads, you will arrest people, but the drug war continues, drugs continue, and to move. It's a billion-dollar industry, and it's part of organized crime. So when you hear utterances coming out of Venezuela of aggression, you hear the consideration, and I must say the allegations of consideration that Russia is even considering, releasing or deploying hypersonic missiles into this area as a support other nations. My question that I threw out in another place was, okay, so we have the US and the naval forces in this region. What about if friends of Venezuela, allies of Venezuela, people who Venezuela are in bed with, decide to also show a presence in this same peaceful Caribbean Sea? What is our next step as Trinidad and Tobago? And I challenge our decision makers, strategists, Homeland Security, Defense, those, the National Security Council, that at this time we should be engaging in exploratory discussions of what ifs. We should not be caught in a scramble. We should be having contingencies in place so that if this thing goes to another level, how is Trinidad and Tobago going to benefit? And more importantly, that chasm, that gap between informing the citizens correctly from an authenticated source, so that we are kept abreast on developments as the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, because we are facing an independence coming up, yes, in a couple of days' time. And on top of that, within a week, school is going to be opened. So we are about our normal socio-economic flow. Our continuity is there, but there's a tension in the atmosphere a couple hundred miles out in our waters that can go into any direction. The citizens need to be informed. What are the developments? What are the contingencies? And what are also being considered now by government should this go to another level? We are all in anticipation, optimistically, that we can go to bed peacefully, Andy, that this will blow away and it will end and whatever. But there's a strong possibility that it won't.
And if you could go over what you're saying we have to do to prepare ourselves for the worst.
Yes, and that is correct. And I don't say as any worse that we can become a target or we can end up in the middle of a conflict. But if we are to be supportive to any sort of what I'll call assault or attack by a big brother, be the US, forming up a base here in Trinidad and Tobago, where is this going to be held? What are the logistics? How is it going to be accommodated? Where are we going to put aircraft on the ground? Where are we going to berth those size of destroyers? And when we do that, and the Americans are here, what is expected of us in Trinidad and Tobago? Those are some very strong considerations for a nation, for a society that's been basically at peace. And then having that sort of conflict in place. Now, it is nothing new to Trinidad and Tobago if we rewind the tape back in history that we were always accommodating of U.S. bases, U.S. forces. We have continued a lifelong of integrated connections and operations with the U.S. As I said, we had just completed a successful trade winds coordinated by the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force. We still have the military hospital, U.S. Naval Military Hospital alongside. We had JIATF in here recently. So there has been a continued good relationship with the U.S. and we are accustomed to that. But I'm talking now not in a level of training and visitations and routine. We're talking now at a level of conflict, at a level of where America is now engaged in other countries should go to that direction. What is Trinidad? And I don't have all the points, and I will not reveal all the points in open forum like that. I think the government has those with the roles and the responsibilities so to do. My role here with you in this conversation this evening, Andy, is to flick the switch a little bit so that people can start thinking in a certain space and consider to explore the what ifs. You must have the what if plan in place. Should it go in that direction? Not wait till it happens, then we start to scramble into decision making.
Yeah, and this question about being a zone of peace and so on, how do we avoid action that is possible given what we know now, what is in the ground?
Yeah, exactly. And you see, we have projected the image of a zone of peace in the region, in the Caribbean, and it is true. We have been void of conflict. There have been some issues with Haiti, issues with some of the other countries. We have the small arms and light weapons trade. We have the gangs within the region. Yes, so there is some conflict. There are some issues. There's some situations with crime and criminality. But in a greater sense, we have been a zone of peace. But we have to understand what is being seen and echoed out of the US, out of the UK, with travel bans and advisories. That doesn't speak to a zone of peace. When we hear that we have been aligned to the crime reduction move by the US in Washington, and that imbalance of, at least we're not as bad off as Trinidad and Tobago. We are mentioned on the world map of crime. That is not a zone of peace. And I want to add something to this. In a couple of days' time, Guyana is facing a general elections. And should the government in Guyana change, supposing that the government changes, we have a lit fuse on the border of Essequibo, both on the land and in the maritime area with regard to land that Venezuela is saying that is theirs and that Guyana is saying that are theirs historically over the years. In a dispute, although the ICJ said certain things, Venezuela has dismissed that. So there's what we call a bubbling dispute there. If the government changes in Guyana, there's a transition of government. And during that transition, there's a vulnerability. Just suppose Venezuela decides to maximize on that vulnerability while there's a government in transition. What is going to be the situation? Because when a government is in transition, executive order, the armed forces, the defense, who is giving the instructions? Who are we taking the instructions from? Who's in government? Who's not in government? That can be very fragile for Guyana and an opportunity for Venezuela. So I am advising from my regional expertise that we as CARICOM, Trinidad and Tobago, the US, whatever, needs to have a specific attention, a focused effort on items of this nature, and just don't take it for granted. And because we have to be losing sleep, we have to be sleeplessly stressed as leaders in the region because of the tension in the atmosphere.
Well, I'm afraid so, but I'll have to have you back at a point where we get more time to explore that, because that is an issue as hot as anything. Because as you say, if there's supposed to be a change in administration, things could happen in between there.
Correct. There's a moment in that change where you're caught between a rock and a hard place and nobody's in charge. That could end up being there, and that is where enemies strike when there's a level of vulnerability.
Yeah.
And that is a serious consideration. But
I see this. even with let's take the government of Trinidad and Tobago at the moment for granted for some period to come, some years to come, and so on. Still, there's the issue as sort of articulated by the Prime Minister. This is what we want to do for our care and protection. What you feel elsewhere in CARICOM, that is your feeling. This is what we're going to do, and that's talk that has to be sort of rationalized and sort of taken down a peg or two, you think?
Yeah, I know she did say that indeed. I'm still saying, however, with that statement, there should still be some diplomatic conversations amongst CARICOM, although she has said that with our regional representatives through Foreign Affairs. We have to maintain the good relations. At the end of the day, these are our neighbors. These people you have to live with. When America pulls up and they move out of here, we are left with these neighbors. You understand what I'm saying? So it's not enmity, it's not conflict. We're making a stand, yes, but we want to continue our good relations. It comes like, you don't want to fall out with your neighbor. It's the same road you're passing every day. So I think in an effort of continuity and maintaining and keeping our good relations, diplomatic conversations in the back end needs to be continued to keep that bridge. We are about building bridges, and breaking walls. In addition to that, what is very necessary here is that it's a new dynamic for the region. We are in some instances happy that we have the presence of the US in the Caribbean Sea, but we must also be strategic and work smart and maximize on the advantage, because as we speak, what is prevalent and affecting societies in the region is the SALW, the small arms and light weapons trade.
Yes.
And that is the trade of small arms and guns and automatic rifles coming out of North America via the supply chain channel. So the same channel that drugs and narcotics are leaving the Caribbean is the same channel that small arms and light weapons trade, the illegal arms trade, is coming in to the Caribbean. So my simple, humble request is, if we are going to police narcotics coming out of the region, let us also police the illegal arms trade coming into the region. And therefore, we will maximize the presence of the policing in the maritime space.
All right. Thank you very much, sir. Garvin Heerah, Tension in the Atmosphere. That was a peaceful basis discussion. Our thanks also to Mr. Clyde Weatherhead and David Abdullah. That will do it for us in this edition of the program. Tune in tomorrow. We'll be back here with similar kinds of issues. Stay with us.
So that's where we're going to leave it for today inside of the Drive Time Exchange. Of course, tomorrow we look forward to see what's going to be on the agenda. All right, so stick with us. Remember, 4 to 6 p.m. right here on New Era TT Radio.
Today, when I look around in the world, what do I see? I see footprints that man have left on the sand while walking through times